I know it might seem impossible to imagine a Chinese person hating China. Most surveys show that Chinese citizens are among the most patriotic people in the world. They're proud of 5,000 years of civilization, proud of the economic growth, the culture, the language, and the country's traditions. Most Chinese genuinely love the country where they were born and believe China is the best place on earth. And the government works hard to show that everyone is happy in China. No one has problems. It's the perfect place, loved by the people. But there's a much less visible side to all this, and that side is usually not discussed in public. Those conversations happen in private forums accessed through VPNs, in the stories of people who emigrated and can finally speak without filters, in memes that live for a few hours before being deleted, or in the silence of young people who no longer believe the country's promises. This video is exactly about that. The real documented problems that exist inside one of the most complex and contradictory countries in the world. I'll show you what happens when millions of people live frustrated in a country that didn't deliver and can't complain about it. We'll start in the place where most Chinese people spend the bulk of their waking lives: work. If you've never heard of 996, it refers to a Chinese work schedule that's become widespread, especially in the tech sector. People work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. That's not an exception, even during crises or project delivery periods. In 2019, Jack Ma, whom you all know well, gave an interview that went viral before he was, unsurprisingly, censored. He said that 996 was a blessing and that young people should be grateful for the opportunity to work that hard. The reaction on Chinese social media was one of outrage, and then, gradually, posts began to disappear and the whole discussion was muffled. But the frustration didn't vanish with the posts. It turned into a movement known as lying flat, tang ping, literally something like lying on your back. Basically, it's young Chinese people choosing to do the bare minimum to get by. They don't want to be productive, don't want to marry, don't want to have children, don't want to buy apartments, and don't want to take part in that whole system of collective sacrifice. The government labeled lying flat as a very problematic, socially harmful behavior, and discussion about it was censored on many platforms. After lying flat came Beilan, which is even more radical, a whole generation of Chinese saying they're giving up and don't want to compete. And it's not just about laziness. There are many documented cases of young workers who literally worked themselves to death. And whenever one of those cases comes to light and goes viral, it usually gets hushed up after a while. Now imagine this. You were born in a small town in the Chinese interior. At 18, you head to Shanghai in search of work and opportunity, like hundreds of millions before you. You get a job, rent a room, start building a life. Then you discover that, in the eyes of the state, you still aren't from Shanghai. You will never be from Shanghai. And that has very practical consequences. This is the hukou, a household registration system created in the 1950s that ties every citizen to the place where they were born. Not where they live, work, or pay taxes. Where they were born. And that registration determines where you can access public health care, schooling for your children, and social security. So, a migrant worker in Beijing can pay taxes in the city for decades and still may not have the right to enroll their kids in the local public schools. You can work in a hospital and still not have the right to use that city's healthcare system as a resident. You can literally build the skyscrapers of a metropolis and feel like you don't belong to it. It's estimated that around 290 million migrant workers live in that condition in China. That's more than the entire population of the United States. Some reforms have been announced, partially implemented, and promised again, but the core of the system endures. And the feeling many Chinese report, in accounts gathered by journalists and researchers, is that the place you were born sets a ceiling you can never break through, no matter how hard you try. If the hukou is an invisible ceiling, the housing market is a concrete wall. In China's big cities, apartment prices are among the least affordable in the world relative to local incomes. In Beijing and Shanghai, buying a reasonably sized home would demand a worker earning the average salary somewhere between 20 and 40 years' worth of income, assuming they didn't spend a single cent. This isn't an exaggeration, it's exactly what the data show. For decades, the message has been the same. Work hard, save with your family, buy an apartment, build stability. A property has always been, and still is, the ultimate symbol that you've made it in life. It's part of the social contract between the citizen and society. Then came a company called Evergrande. Evergrande was the world's largest property developer, not just in China, across the whole planet. In 2021, it began to crumble under a mountain of debt that topped $300 billion. The result was that thousands of Chinese families had paid for apartments that were never delivered. They had poured years of savings, sometimes the life savings of more than one generation, into properties that didn't even exist yet. Maybe they'll never be built. In 2022, buyers of unfinished homes in several cities began to stop making their mortgage payments. The movement became known as the Home Buyers Protest and was quickly censored on social media. Still, the government was forced to respond. China's younger generation has a bitter way of referring to itself in this context. They call themselves the generation that will never own a home and believe they'll never have the lives their parents promised. There's one thing that makes everything more complicated, and that thing is called the Gaokao, China's national college entrance examination. In theory, it's the great equalizer. No matter where you come from, if you study hard enough, you can pass and get into a good university. Pure meritocracy. But in practice, it doesn't work that way. The competition for that exam is brutal, and when young people do make it through the Gaokao and into university, they discover that a degree in China no longer guarantees much of anything, hit record highs in 2023, topping 20% before the government simply stopped publishing the figures. The narrative sold to them was that if they studied and worked hard, they'd be able to build a better life. But that doesn't seem to be how things work in real life. They have access to opportunities, protection, wealth, and a network of influence that makes the rules of the game very different for them. And this isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a phenomenon studied by scholars like Ban Ziwei, an expert on Chinese politics, and documented in investigative reporting by outlets such as Reuters and Bloomberg over the years. President Xi Jinping launched in 2012 one of the largest anti-corruption campaigns in the country's history, and it was real. Thousands of officials were investigated, prosecuted, and even jailed, including high-ranking figures who once seemed untouchable. But some critics, including Chinese political analysts who speak more freely abroad, argue the campaign was also used to eliminate political rivals, and that the structures enabling systemic corruption remain intact. Income inequality in China, measured by the Gini coefficient, is among the highest in Asia. That contrasts with the official rhetoric of common prosperity, a central slogan of Xi's government, and it's a contradiction people in China sense in their daily lives, even without full access to government data. China is the world's largest industrial power, and the workers who made that possible often live without basic protections that workers in even worse-off countries enjoy. Independent unions are banned. There's only the All-China Federation of Trade Unions, and it's controlled by the state. As anywhere else, it's a system that places the state above the workers, not the other way around. Strikes are technically illegal in most contexts. Workers who try to organize independently even risk being detained. And yet they happen, by the hundreds, all year long. Platform workers, app couriers, drivers, are generally in a very vulnerable position. Many news outlets, including some in China, have already documented terrible working conditions at several companies. Ratings. Labor law isn't taken very seriously in most places in China. And this brings us to the trickiest point to think about, the most human aspect of everything we've been talking about. Faced with all of this, exhausting work, unaffordable housing, the Gaokao, the hukou, the censorship people endure, fragile labor rights, what do Chinese people do? Because China also has real valuable things to offer. A deep, rich culture, strong family ties, a cuisine that's a cultural heritage, cities that function, first-rate transport and technology infrastructure, and a collective identity that matters a lot to those born into it. So many end up accepting the bad parts and adapting. Others resist, but in more creative, lower-risk ways. Memes, slang, all tools to talk about something without saying it directly. And there are those who take much greater risks and usually don't end up so well. But ordinary people pay the price. So why do Chinese people hate China? The honest answer is, most don't. But a significant and growing portion, especially among young people, are pretty frustrated with the government and the whole system. China is at once one of humanity's greatest success stories and a system that carries deep, painful problems people feel every day. And the Chinese are a very resilient people who have definitely been through much worse. If this video made you think and you like our content, share it with someone. If you want to keep exploring Asia with us and keep getting videos like this, stop by the channel, subscribe, and check out the other videos I'll leave here. Thank you so much for always following our content. We'll see you in that other video popping up on your screen.